Now in this section we're going to move on to a completely different proposition as far as the drawing is concerned. I've chosen to work on the dead branch that the Kingfisher's perched on in this penultimate section, so that when we do the finishing touches in the final video we can balance bird against branch. So what we're doing to begin with is, as usual, applying a base layer. It's the detail and the texture that we add on top of that that will vary from the plumage of the bird that we've been drawing up until now. So I've chosen a combination of warm greys to build this branch colour and detail, and I'm starting out with warm grey number 3. It has an almost brown tinge to it, and I'm putting in this initial base layer with long drawn out strokes following along the length of the branch, so whenever I introduce any cracks or detail within the texture of the branch, this base layer will help to support that. Now I've moved up one notch on the warm grey scale. I'm using number 4 to begin to start building the shape of the branch by indicating shadows on the undersurface. So I work back and forth across various parts of the drawing, and when I want colour to gradually fade as it needs to on this lower section of the branch, I work up with gradually decreasing pressure to create a soft, delicate transition from deeper shadow on the base of the branch to highlights on the top. And of course, with my illumination coming from the top right on this drawing, that means the bird itself will be casting a nice shadow across the branch. So I put that in just the same way. I've built up a bit more of the grey tone on the lowest section of the branch, and now I'm going to work over it with the bright blender, softening those details, merging one colour with another, and gradually you'll see the form of this old decaying branch will begin to emerge as we get some shape and structure into it. Now I'm going to introduce one or two cracks along the length of this branch, and to do that I'm using the black pencil. Also using it in areas where I want to darken the shadows even further. Gradually applying it. And with these subsequent layers, there isn't quite the need to be concerned about individual irregular marks that you make, because the wood itself will have developed cracks and fissures, patches of various colours, because of the fact that it's been out in the weather, and we want to add some variety to the texture. So happy accidents can occur, and where they do, where you make some irregular marks, or perhaps you didn't mean to, See if you can incorporate them into the drawing, just to help that variety. Now I used a small rolled paper blender on that section. Some people call them stumps, some people call them torchons. But they're very good for blending areas where you want a soft feel. So I just worked over those shadow areas a touch just to move the colour around a little bit. This particular branch that it's actually a piece of driftwood that I picked up on the beach on one occasion, which has interesting patterns on it, and it has this rather dark indentation at one end which just helps to add a little bit of interest. I do really enjoy drawing old weathered wood, especially where there are lots of cracks and crevices and holes, variations in colour and texture. But for this particular drawing, I'm going to keep the detail that I add to this branch fairly simple. The focus of this video was about drawing the kingfisher, so although I want a realistic looking branch for the bird to sit on, I'm not too concerned with creating masses of detail and variety in this particular section. So now, having got those sections in, I'm working over with the Bistre brown pencil again. And we're beginning to create some variety in the overall appearance of this branch. Introducing different colours. Creating different patterns and areas of detail. Because the branch itself is going to be fairly pale in colour, I can still see, even though I've worked over that area, I can see my pencil outline. So I'm using the mounting putty just to take that away. We want this branch to have some shape. It needs to feel as though it's curving away from you, and we need that outline removed. I'm beginning to build the tone on this left-hand end of this particular section of the branch, showing that there's a rounded structure to it, and therefore a certain amount of shadow will be required to help to suggest that. You can see with some of these lines that I'm adding now, I'm beginning to follow the intended shape of the branch, so we have some curves and some irregularities in some of these marks. The base colours are in, some of the shadowed areas are established, and now we're beginning to suggest more surface detail with some of these latter marks. These curved lines all help to suggest the shape. Establishing a little bit more shadow cast by the bird onto the branch itself. The good thing about shadows in a drawing like this is that the shadows on the bird and on the branch itself will help to anchor the bird to that perch. It's very important to try and avoid the result looking as though the bird's the cutout which has just been slapped on in a particular place, because that seemed to be the right position for it. You have to acknowledge that both bird and branch are in the same ambient lighting, the light is hitting them in the same direction, and that means when the two come together and the bird lands on the branch, immediately it will be casting a shadow across that surface, and it makes the two become part of the whole drawing rather than two separate elements that just happen to have been placed close together. We're getting a little bit more surface texture now, a few more variations in the colours and the sweeping lines of the wood. Now we have a really interesting section here on that driftwood that I'm using, where some funny shapes and angles of branches have created a really interesting pattern. And because this portion is appearing from behind the section that the kingfisher is sitting on, the kingfisher section is going to cast quite a dark shadow over this, so we really begin to build in this area. Increasing the depth of tone. Importantly, wherever I've added grey to help to create the shadow, I will still go back over with a brown pencil and work over the top of it, because ultimately you want the shadow to appear to be the same colour that the whole of the branch exhibits, but with reduced illumination. So grey on its own wouldn't create as successful a shadow as putting grey in first and working back over it with some of your brown. And now I'm even coming into these areas with black, where I really want that shadow to be dark. But having applied that now, I'm using the paper blender again, and working that around brings out some of the brown colour from underneath, mixes it with the black that I've added, and helps to create a more successful shadow in that area. Some areas are going to be even darker, like this one. The very tight edge that's just peeping out from beneath this paler upper section needs some extra tone, needs to be darker. You can see the blender picks up colour and moves it around, and as I work my way down the paler section, it takes some of that colour and applies it to those lower sections. So again, we're creating a soft shadow actually with very little work. And we're creating a shadow as well that isn't composed of lines. So again, it becomes a much more successful depiction. Now using my brown, I'm feathering the tone down towards the base of the drawing. And with this one, again, because the focus has been primarily on the Kingfisher, I'm just fading out the various portions of this branch, letting them fade, not being too worried about taking them to the edge of the picture or about them being too complete. Now we're going to repeat the process that we established in the first part of this branch on the section to the right of the bird. Taking the warm grey, fading it out, coming back in with number 4, again building the tone, establishing the shadows on the bottom edge. And using my black pencil, I've extended that split in the branch that started on the left hand side, introducing 1 or 2 more now. And that's an important thing to remember as well when you're working on drawings like this. If you introduce some detail into an area that's occupied by the animal or bird, it's often easy to forget that actually a crack like that could potentially extend much further, and if you take it up to the bird and then stop, the end result will look a little bit strange. So carrying those cracks along a bit further, as I have done with the 2 longer ones, they suddenly appear the other side of the bird as well. It's another indication of the fact that the bird is part of this drawing. Now we're softening those applied layers. Just a little bit more work now to build the shadows. Now all the branches in, we can see where perhaps we need a little bit more depth in the shadows. Working over them with the black pencil. Trying to get a bit of variety. Shadows darkest, closest to the bird, and then feathers away the further from the bird it is. So this completes the section on the branch, and in the final section we're going to come back in and apply what I always term the finishing touches. Now everything's in place, we can decide where we need more highlights, perhaps more shadows. We can build colour where we need it and bring the drawing to a complete and successful conclusion.